Welcome to the Long Range Pursuit Podcast, presented by Gunworks, where we learn about and share long-range shooting techniques, science, and gear.
All right, welcome to another episode of Long Range Pursuit Podcast. This is Ian Miner, and I've got Brian Poor and Jeremy Winters with me here again. I just pulled the short straw, and I'm hosting this one, but it could be any of us. But
you're doing a pretty good job at us. I think you'd be doing it for a while.
Hold on to this
permanent position.
Yeah. Okay, well, today we're talking about rangefinders. Okay, and there's some different ones out there, obviously, different brands and whatnot, but we're talking specifically between a ballistic smart rangefinder and maybe an older dumb rangefinder.
I like that, smart versus dumb.
Yeah, okay. So let's define what a smart rangefinder is, or let's create a baseline there.
Well, I say a smart rangefinder would be a rangefinder that has your rifle's ballistics included in this program.
And okay, so let's stop right there. How about a
sensor suite?
Okay, so
yes.
Yeah. What about a rangefinder that just has it maybe not your rifle, but it has, in the realm of. You've seen those rangefinders
where they choose like a ballistic profile that's
like an A, B, or C.
That fits in there.
Does that count?
That's a standard rangefinder.
Okay, that's a dumb rangefinder that is going to school and it's becoming educated.
I would say the only reason I say that is it gives you a false sense of accuracy at distance. Yeah. It's going to allow you to push further than you should, let's say, and so it shouldn't be included in what we'd consider smart or type rangefinder.
Okay, so let's get back, and maybe we'll be able to define that a little bit better once they know the smart and dumb again.
So I kind of think you really have three generations almost.
Okay.
You had the original generation of rangefinders, which is just when rangefinders first came out, and it would give you a distance, and it would probably give you an angle, and it would give you like a horizontally adjusted angle for that distance. And then the next generation of laser rangefinders, it didn't have your rifle's ballistics, but it's what Jeremy was talking about. It would have like a band A, band B, or band C. So if you were shooting a 300 Win Mag, it was in band A. If you were shooting a 30-30, it was in band C. Yeah. And it had an approximation. And then just the third generation, I would really say, is your smart current laser rangefinders, which have your rifle's ballistics and all the weather, altitude, or air pressure, humidity, temperature, and angle sensors on board, like Jeremy was talking about.
Okay, yeah, kind of yours
all in one, right?
Yeah.
We don't need another device coinciding with it to perform the most accurate ballistic calculation.
Okay, so it's calculating or sensing all of those things. What is that doing for you, though? Okay, cool. I know the temperature changed. I know the elevation changed. Like, obviously, I'm being devil's advocate here, but what's that doing for you?
Well, what it's doing is it's basically giving you an accurate ballistic solution based on the specific ballistics of your rifle and in the real-time atmospherics of the location and conditions you're in at that moment.
Okay, so basically you are creating a rifle in some kind of app or computer program or whatever, and you are transferring it to the rangefinder so it can give you ballistic solutions, but then it can adapt to the environment and give you solutions based on the changes.
It knows what baseline the profile was set at.
Mm-hmm.
Say, for example, maybe it was set at 4,000 feet and 60 degrees. It knows that baseline, and therefore now when you move outside of that baseline, it basically knows the difference. And so it knows how to apply the difference in the air pressure and the atmospherics to a slightly different ballistic solution.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that gives us calculated numbers versus a dope card. Why not just use an old rangefinder and use a dope card? Again, that sensor suite's coming into play, right? But what's the old school way versus the new school way, I guess, of getting your ballistic solutions then?
Yeah, I'd almost say there's almost like three generations of that too. The first generation was to tape a piece of paper to the stock of your rifle and write down, 200 yards, 300 yards, 400 yards, 500 yards, and then the next generation was to take that dope card and actually put it on your scope turret, which would be a BDC turret, because now I have that information actually on my scope turret where it matters. And then the third generation would be having a rangefinder with all the atmospheric sensors that knows what that BDC turret is set for, and therefore it knows the difference. You know, because that BDC turret will work just fine as long as you never move outside of the atmospheric condition that BDC turret was set for, and you don't shoot angles.
Sure.
But the laser rangefinder gives you the ability to now move outside of those atmospheric conditions and also to shoot angles and still calculate correctly.
Sure. And
so your BDC is just like your chart that you're talking about, your dope chart, right?
Yeah.
So you have a dope chart. It's set for you built it on this set of conditions this day, right? Same as the turret. It's essentially a laser engraved chart.
Yeah.
And so, like Brian was saying, as soon as you get outside of that realm, whether it's the BDC turret or your dope chart, we need to make corrections to that outside of where our baseline is, whether it's up or down or sideways or whatever it needs to be. And so the smart rangefinder does all that for you. The standard rangefinder that's not smart, let's say, and your dope card, now we have to have another device, an app or a Kestrel or whatever. We have to re-input this new set of conditions, and then it's going to re-output a new dope card.
Right.
And so now I have this new dope card for this new set of conditions, right?
Sure.
And then we move outside of that set of conditions. So I think the progression here goes from that dope card to the standard rangefinder to not only a much faster, but I think a much more accurate way of doing it, because you have in my opinion, the fewer devices you're playing with, the less chance you have of making a mistake inputting something. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I think I don't want to say the older way of doing it, but the traditional way of doing it with a dope card and then a standard rangefinder, you have so many chances to get things wrong because you have to re-input all that data over and over and over again, that it causes more errors. And so I think it's more accurate to do it with a smart rangefinder, because once it's programmed and verified, then it's standalone.
Yeah.
Push the button and it's giving you solutions at whatever set of conditions you're at.
Right.
I actually think that you've probably got a really good background in being able to explain the difference, because at your point in time in the Marine Corps was using smart Kestrels.
Mm-hmm.
They had a ballistic program in them, as opposed, and then just basically using a dumb laser rangefinder to get a range.
Yep.
So I think you're probably in a really good position to explain the difference on what it's like having to input that data into a Kestrel versus getting it with a button push.
Sure.
Smart laser rangefinder.
Yeah. And my mind's going all over the place because we got some flickering lights. So since we're on a roll, I'll tell the story and then we'll deal with these technical difficulties here. Okay. But when I first got into the Marine Corps, we didn't have the Kestrels yet. They probably did, but they weren't like in using them in the training quite yet. And so it was the old school, lasing it and shooting it and writing down your dope. And we had, I had a booklet that was probably, 10 to 20 pages full of dopes. And it was like, this range in Pendleton, this range in 29 Palms, this range in Quantico. And there's all these different atmospheric conditions but you only get so much training. And so you have data on previous engagements, dope, for your gun for those different things. And so then when we would deploy, it's basically like, okay, let's look in our booklet and see which one's closest to, and if we need to make some adjustments. And we, that's how we did it. And but then, then they implemented the Kestrel. It really started going into school, or getting implemented into the school, and it was awesome. All of a sudden, you could make changes if you need to, obviously, in your rifle input if your muzzle velocity changed and stuff like that, versus just adding or taking off 0.1 or 0.2 because your muzzle velocity is growing or something. But it became this, here's this sweet thing that it's got sensors on board as well, and you can have a live feed so that, you spin that thing and it senses, and then, it changes your dopes. Boom, there you go. You change your dopes. But the one we used, I can't remember if it gave you a dope chart. I don't think it did. I think it gave us, you typed in the range and it gave you your dope.
Yeah.
And that still takes time. And heck, Aaron, myself, and Garrett did a video on that and how long it takes to type in a number and then get the range and then dial it on, versus a rangefinder that you push the button and it tells you all the information right away.
Yeah.
The Kestrel is awesome. It's a great piece of gear, but it's almost outdated. I have one and I love it, and it can come into play. But when your rangefinder does it all, it's kind of It's old school now.
Yeah, I think it's just the efficiency of that workflow out in the field. You know, I've got to capture an azimuth with a Kestrel. I got to capture a wind speed, you know, and then I got to go through this process. I got to range the target. Now I got to input the range into the target. You know, if there's an angle, I got to input that angle into the target. And then now it's going to give me data to put on the gun. And I personally prefer to work with a smart laser rangefinder, and I'll just use an $80 Kestrel just to give me a wind speed.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and I'll input that wind speed into the laser. And I just find the workflow on that's a lot more efficient in the field than using a Kestrel.
For sure. And the crazy thing is, like, when we hosted that NRL match, the Sheep Mountain Shootout, which we're doing again this year, but we had kind of a prep day where guys would come out and check their gear and make sure their zeros are good, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of guys were using that. They were using, you know, a real nice rangefinder, but it didn't have that built in. Or some guys had even like the Swaros that have the ballistic capabilities, but they were just using it for a range and then using the Kestrel. Yeah. And they hunt a lot. You know, a couple people I'm thinking of, and it's like, dang, you don't know the capability of your system, and you're really selling it short. Next thing is I put on in my notes is velocity king anymore? Or is that relevant? The quote, velocity is king. What do you think, Jeremy?
No. As soon as rangefinders showed up, velocity stopped being king. Right? As soon as we knew the distance and we had a way to dial that correction in, as long as the bullet, if you're a hunter, as long as the bullet impacts the target with enough velocity to expand or do whatever you want that bullet to do, then we don't need a lot of velocity. And usually the more pressure equals the more velocity, but the more pressure usually equals the more inconsistencies, and the harder it is to keep that in the accuracy node and some other things like that. So I would say velocity hasn't been king for a long time. Obviously the industry's, it's slow, man. Like, it's slow to come around, and so we still, you know, there's still a lot of guys out there that are preaching velocity, but in the grand scheme of things, who cares if at 1,000 yards I have to dial 5 or 6 more clicks, you know? But, you know, if I can cut my barrel down to 18 instead of having a 24-inch pipe on there, bonus for me.
Yeah. But don't you want enough velocity to knock the animal down?
Like I said, as long as the bullet gets there with enough impact. And so that's where the decision has to come, right? You should probably choose the bullet you want to shoot first.
Yeah.
Then choose the caliber that appropriately puts that bullet on target at the distance you want to shoot, and then choose the caliber, and then choose the rifle after that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point.
And so actually, to jump even further into that, is if we're going to select the bullet, and if velocity isn't king anymore, what's the most important criteria when selecting a bullet for long-range shooting outside of its terminal performance?
Well, how well it shoots.
Well, wind. Yeah, I mean, because really that's what that transition was, you know, and I really think that, you know, from the outside looking in at the time, you know, if you go back to the history of Gunworks, you know, that's really what created Gunworks, was recognizing that quantum shift had taken place and that with technology, velocity didn't matter anymore. And then immediately shifting gears and saying, well, if velocity doesn't matter anymore, then what's the most important now? Well, ballistic coefficient and that bullet's ability to overcome the effects of wind, which is related to ballistic coefficient. Yep. That became the most important, because wind is now the biggest variable. It's the only thing that we can't scientifically precisely calculate for.
Sure, absolutely.
Yet.
Yeah.
Working on it.
I think there's some LiDAR stuff coming down the pipe that's pretty cool if you're into that kind of stuff. So
yeah, that's gonna be spendy for a while probably. And then it'll become the natural.
Yeah, it always is, right?
Making a joke on the term knockdown power. I like your story on kind of your comparing with archery. And
it's like knockdown power, and a combination of knockdown power, or if you're also talking about energy, you know, sometimes you'll hear about it takes a certain amount of foot-pounds of energy to, you know, kill an animal, you know, or to be legal for hunting for an animal in a certain state or something, you know, but since energy is so heavily dependent upon velocity, because I believe velocity is squared in it, you know, and so, you can get a 22-250 with 2,000 foot-pounds of energy that theoretically should be legal for hunting elk, but it's not. No one should ever shoot an elk with that. But yet my compound bow shooting a 500 grain arrow, you know, got what, 70, 80 foot-pounds of energy, because the velocity is so low. But I challenge anyone to say that their rifle kills better than my 70-pound compound bow does.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think that's super interesting. We talk about it in our terminal ballistics class in LRU, is kind of those different terms and what people really mean, or why that term might be kind of a not so great way of measuring that caliber's ability to kill an animal, and
on the knockdown power side, it's just Newton's law. If that bullet's going to knock an animal over that's comparable size to us, then Newton's law says the recoil is going to knock us over.
Yeah.
So unless you're shooting like an old 4-bore from Africa or something where the recoil literally would knock you over, then it's probably not going to knock the animal over.
Yeah, if you're getting that immediate drop that you think of as knockdown power, it's probably nervous system. Really clipping something there that's just shutting the lights off on the thing. But anyway, that's its own debate there. But let's move on from velocity then. How about, this is just kind of, I guess it's on the same thing as velocity skiing actually, is dialing versus holding. Let's talk distance versus wind. Dialing versus holding for wind, like a BDC, or excuse me, for distance, like a BDC reticle and whatnot. Where I was kind of getting at with the velocity skiing isn't relevant anymore. What I was really more getting at was, why did that saying come about? It was, I wanted a gun that shoots super flat, that I can shoot and hold on hair out to 300 yards or 400 yards or whatever it was, right? And we can do those same things with the calibers we're shooting and the same scopes we're shooting, but it's more accurate to dial anyway.
Well, I also think it's like anything you do, you got to look at it from the perspective of, basically, how could I screw this up under stress? And if there's a way I could screw it up under stress, try to change the process so I'm less likely to be able to screw it up under stress. And so it's pretty intuitive to dial a turret to 850 yards, but trying to count down a certain number of hash marks to correspond to 850 yards and remember what those hash marks are, so I go to the correct point in the reticle, and at the same time hold 2 minutes of wind. There's a whole lot of mental stuff going on there under the pressure of a shot. And if you look at where a lot of that came from, a lot of that comes from competition shooters, and they have their own reason for wanting to be able to do something very fast, because everything's under a time crunch to shoot multiple targets as fast as possible. So if they can hold without having to come off the gun and dial, and they're in a competition type environment, and these guys train a lot and they're very good at it, they're able to do that effectively. But the application or the need is so much different than a hunter just trying to make one perfect shot on one animal.
Sure.
That I really think using your elevation turret, for your range, that's 100% the way to go.
Yeah. I was going to throw in a wrench in there too, and then you add whether it's first focal point or second focal point.
Yeah.
Then you got to know what power you're on and what those values are too. Yeah. Anything on that, Jeremy?
No, I mean, all this is kind of stemming from, that rangefinder side, right? We weren't able to do a lot of this before we had these really smart, accurate rangefinders, and that allowed us, a lot more leeway on some of the choices we made, for sure. You weren't pigeonholed in any way, right? I didn't have to shoot a big giant 30 cal with a small bullet really fast anymore. I could shoot a nice recoiling, 6.5 or 7 millimeter and be even more productive at the longer distances, because I was able to range it and then have a solution built in. That kind of changed, let's say the ballistic side or that ballistic need that we all used to have. Still do to some degree, right? I mean, it's the reason that we shoot 7s and 30s instead of 6.5s, but we just
Except you.
manly men.
Except you.
Yeah, I'm a 6.5 guy through and through.
Yep, it's a pretty one too. Orange all over the place.
Yeah, for a while anyway.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's dive into angles. Rifleman's rule. What is the rifleman's rule? And then kind of what's maybe a better way of doing that? Brian, I know you wrote a blog on this.
Yeah.
Has that blog come out yet? Do you know?
Yeah. There's actually a blog out there, and we did a video on it.
Okay. Yeah. Brian's got a really good video on that on YouTube, and I think it explains it great, and you visually see the difference perfectly. And luckily, Brian hit some good shots to really show it. Otherwise, you would have been hiking up and down the mountain a couple times to spray paint.
Yeah, to spray paint that target that was, probably 1,000 vertical feet and 700 yards below instead of a couple trips.
Yeah. So yeah, get into that, Brian.
No, so if you look back at how you compensate for angles, getting back into that first generation of laser rangefinders that just give you a horizontally adjusted distance. We could also call that the map distance method, or we call that the what do we call it?
The Rifleman's rule.
The Rifleman's rule.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Rifleman's rule, then the map distance method. And when I worked at sniper school in the Marine Corps, man, we taught the map distance method like that was a gospel.
Yeah.
Like this is the way to do it. And basically what you're doing there is you're just doing geometry. You have a laser rangefinder that's giving you the range, or you maybe not even have it. We didn't have that, but we would measure the angle, and then we'd use a middle relation formula to get the range, and then we would take the cosine for that angle and multiply it times the range, and that would give us an adjusted range that we would put on. We actually had BDC turrets on that generation of, Marine Corps M40s. And
I'm picturing you, Brian, doing this. When Brian did this, they were using protractors. And...
it was completely a protractor with a fishing weight and a string on it.
Yep. To measure that angle.
We're getting our angles.
Yeah.
And so the problem with that is because you're making a percentage change to the range. However, the correct way to do that, and the information was out there then, we just were sourcing the wrong information, because you could look at whichever edition of like the Sierra Bullet Manual that was current back in the late 80s, early 90s, it explained the correct way to calculate angles, and you have to take that cosine for the angle and you apply that to the amount of your bullet drop as opposed to applying it to the range. And the reason that those two aren't the same is because range is linear, whereas your amount of bullet drop is not linear with range, because as that bullet's going down range, it's losing velocity, therefore it drops faster and faster. And so because those two aren't linear, when you apply the cosine to the range, it gives you an error, and it starts to overcorrect for the angle. So I would say once you get past 500 yards and about 20 degrees, when you use the map distance method, the horizontal range method, or the Rifleman's rule, 3 different names, all for the same thing, you're going to start impacting low. If you don't compensate for the angle at all, you're going to impact high. But then if you compensate using this old technology, it's going to impact low. It basically overcorrects.
Sure.
And so to correctly calculate for an angle, you have to have a laser rangefinder that has your rifle's ballistics programmed into it for it to calculate that correctly.
Yeah. My wheels are turning. It's just, it's...
Which we haven't had until just the last 4 or 5 years, right? Like, most rangefinders up until the last little bit, we're doing the Rifleman's rule.
Well, I think that
very seldom did any rangefinder actually give you a correction based on your drop.
The original G7?
Yeah.
I guess that was probably the first one.
It was definitely the first that did ballistics. I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to say if it was the first to actually...
Well, because like Leopold was doing it with their TBR, which had like the 3 categories of ballistics in it.
Yeah.
So I think they were applying the solution correctly.
Just the right ballistics.
It just wasn't the exact ballistics to your rifle, so there was an error in there. It was probably better than the first generation.
Yeah, that's why I was a little hesitant. I think there was others doing it. I think ours was the most accurate way to do it, because you were able to build a profile into it. And then obviously, Revic's kind of taken that to a whole new level, with a better sensor suite, and, we can get into all kinds of different stuff there. But now the correction it's almost too accurate, because then it really shows you your flaws downrange.
Yeah. You would definitely get some good data from this stuff now.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome.
And as you explained that, I had a thought, and it's lost me now, but just, it's, we teach it every day, but again, hearing you say it again, it brings up, why it, I don't know, just brings up more thoughts. I think the simple way of saying it is, and again, it's not simple because it's a cosine, but it's like the Rifleman's rule is a cosine times the range.
Yep.
And then you dial to the whatever that range is now.
Yes.
The right way to do it is the cosine times the dope for that range, or the ballistic solution for that range.
Yes.
Like that's the baseline right there. If you can that's the difference.
Yeah.
And if you do that, if you even get on your ballistic calculator and you mess with that, you can see, run the numbers. Yep. And you can keep the angle at 0 and just run, 500 yards times, a 30-degree angle. What was that? 0.87. And whatever that is, 500 times 0.87.
435 or something it equals.
Okay, so then you type 435 and see what your dope is, and then write that dope down.
Yeah.
And then rather than that, type in 500, and then actually go into your ballistic calculator and change the angle to 30 degrees. And then it's going to take that cosine times the dope. And instead of 435, it's going to give you a dope that
for probably about 450 or something.
Yeah.
460.
And then you can compare the two dopes and see that one would have been, holy crap, that's a minute lower.
Yeah.
Meaning I would have shot, 5 or 6 inches lower than if I
probably at 500, you'll see, a little bit of difference, but check it at 500.
Yeah. I should have given them more.
Yeah. But and you go out to 1,000, it's a huge difference. It's, if we run the difference in that, like we have an example we show in class, just running on the ballistic program, whereas basically a 2-minute error when we're calculating using the map distance method or the Rifleman's rule versus the correct dope. There's about a 2-minute error there. So that's
at 1,000.
At 1,000,
yeah.
That's 20 inches.
20 inches, yeah. I think Rifleman's rule, I say, is accurate out to about 500 yards and no steeper than 20 degrees. And if you combine those two, then holy cow, it's quite a bit off. Yeah. Okay. Well, we talked about second guessing the technology in a different podcast, but basically trust the technology. Okay. Once you verified that it works, trust it, because as soon as you don't, and you kind of go with what you think your gut instinct is, you get proven wrong pretty fast too. I hate saying that because I like rules of thumb. I like using my brain to do the math real quick and going with your gut. But when you're shooting long distance and you're shooting precision and you're shooting in some wind and shooting angles, the gut doesn't really do it anymore.
Yeah, and I think anytime you're shooting long range, when you put a whole bunch of variables in there, the question always comes up, is like, how precise do we have to be? Well, and the answer is as precise as possible. Because it's easy to look at it and say, well, it's only a quarter minute error. What's a quarter minute at 1,000 yards? 2.5 inches. Okay, who cares? But the problem you run into is when you have multiple quarter minute errors, and I like to call it Murphy's Law of stacking errors, is that when your target shooting on the range, this quarter minute error and this half minute error will cancel out this quarter minute error, and you end up fairly center, even though you had a bunch of quarter minute angles there, but as soon as this is like the freaking hunt of a lifetime, and Mr. Murphy's along, all those errors are going to stack in one direction, and you're going to have this big, huge, minute and a half miss, and you can't understand why. And it's because you weren't being as precise as possible in every aspect of your calculations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
Be as precise as possible. Why? Why not? You know? Well, anything, Jeremy, on that?
No.
Okay. How about this one then? Jeremy, he teaches the rangefinder class really well when we do it. Long Range University. I like to sit in and listen because I learn a ton. But how about an offset on your rangefinder?
Oh, you're talking about where the beam is in relation to the aiming reticle?
Yeah.
Like the offset there?
Yep.
It's something that everybody should have the ability to check, right? And, it's easy to check. You can just, find I like to use like a sign or something about 100 yards away. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your aiming reticle and you're going to put it off the sign. And you're going to fire that unit. And it's probably not going to give you a range. It's going to go past the sign and out into nothingness, right? You're just going to keep pressing the button, or like on ours, you can go to scan or something like that. You can hold it for up to 5 seconds. You just move it from the left to the right, or from the right to the left, and that'll give you your left edge. Then you do the opposite way, that's your right edge. What you're doing is you're tracking where that beam is in relation to that aiming reticle, because we've had instances where some competitors and some other rangefinders that we've used out in the industry, you'd be ranging a target, but you wouldn't range past 600 or 700 yards. And we're like, man, we know this rangefinder's better than that. What's going on? And when we actually got to checking, the beam was actually pointed up and to the left or wherever it was going. So by the time you got out to 600 yards, you were shooting into the sky essentially. Mm-hmm. And so, that affects the unit's ability to give you, good ranges. And if you don't have a good range, you don't have a solution, any kind of a solution. So it's always good to know where that reticle is in relation to whatever, crosshair or whatever your aiming point is, in the unit.
Yeah. And you shouldn't, it's good to know, but then you should send that sucker back in to get recalibrated.
Yeah, obviously if it's wrong, right? It's good to know, because it's like, how many times have you dropped your rangefinder on a hunt, right? Like, and maybe 9 times out of 10, it's not going to do anything. But if you had this way of checking it really quick, then you wouldn't have that failure on a, $50,000 sheep hunt or whatever the case.
You could literally get a range that's 100 yards off, because it's just the laser's right at the bottom of the reticle and you're getting the range off the ground way in front of him.
Yeah.
Or if it's going over his back and hitting the ridge behind him, you could be 100 yards in that direction.
Yeah.
And for people to grasp that concept, it's really the same concept as zeroing a rifle, because you're making sure the bore and the crosshairs are both pointed at the same place.
Yep.
But we got the ability to just zero in a rifle. In a laser rangefinder, that's set in the factory. And it's basically, there's no way to manually adjust, that reticle to be on the same point as the beam. So if it's not coinciding with each other, it's really it's a warranty return.
Yeah.
And it's subject to, like Jeremy said, getting dropped. It might have been good, but you drop it and now you jar it and now it's no longer aligned.
Right. Yeah. I had the scenario, and that's why I wrote it down, was I had a rangefinder, and I won't say brand names or anything, but I had a rangefinder, and I was going to go on a hunt, and I set up a range, some steel and whatnot to get ready, and I knew I had put this target at 500 yards. And how did I know? Because while I was setting it up, I was lazing the truck back to, the firing line. And I go back to get my rifle set up to go shoot, and I'm lazing this target, and it's reading like 635. Like 635. I know it's at 500. So I was, crap, what's going on? So I remembered, let's see if that offset if there is an offset on this thing. And I started lazing over top, and I was getting, 700, 650, 635. And then my reticle came down onto the target, the top. I was lazing above it. So I was doing the same thing Darren was talking about, but over top. And I was lazing above it, 635, 635. The reticle then touched the top of the target, and I still kept getting 635, 635. So I kept dragging it down. And it wasn't until the top point of my reticle was touching the target that I got 500 yards. And so I knew my offset was high. And so I ended up killing antelope, but I had to laze it with the top portion of my reticle. Like I had to know that offset. But imagine if I went out and shot, saw an animal at 500 yards and it gave me 635, and what my dope change would have been there, and
way over the top.
Yeah. So, and then I've had a couple other hunts where I missed, where I like to, we'll say it was because of that too. I got to get rid of that darn rangefinder.
Yeah.
No, but I think that is that's one of my favorite slides in LRU, is because no one thinks about that.
Yeah.
And it's so important.
Yeah.
Huge difference, hit or miss for sure. So, let's see. How about having the ability to switch? One thing I really like about the BR4 is that you can put multiple guns in there, and you have the ability to switch from one gun to the next, to the next, to the next, and not get a ballistic range or a ballistic calculator out. I love that there's multiple inputs, and this sounds salesy, but it's not. I love ballistic rangefinders. I love the BR4. There's other companies I like as well, but one thing I really like about the BR4 is having multiple profiles. And if you're hunting with a buddy, because that's what ultimately ends up happening, is my buddies that hunt with me, they add their rifle into my rangefinder, and then we hunt that way. Because again, heck, one of my good buddies, he was him and I did the Indoc together in a sniper platoon, and then he came back to come hunting with me. Hasn't shot a rifle for like 8 years, which is crazy. You're like, man, you're scout sniper, bro.
No.
Yeah, what are you doing, Ben? So anyway, I told him about this ballistic rangefinder, and he thought it was the craziest thing, because again, we were used to the range it and use a Kestrel, and that's all he knew too. So when it comes all into one little device that does it all for you, he was blown away. And so am I. So am I. Still to this day, I think it's the best piece of equipment out there if you're getting into long range hunting and long range shooting. Ballistic rangefinder is the way to go.
But the only thing I'd be cautious of, though, is I think when you have multiple profiles in there, it makes it a little bit of an expert's tool.
Yeah.
Because we've had a lot of, I talk about that, minimizing the chance for people to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the big ones they make, is they're not set up on the correct profile.
And that's why the binos are the way they are.
Yeah.
That's why the binos only hold one.
Yep. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we did make that switch for that reason, right?
Yeah.
Like,
see,
and everybody hates it, right? Like when they first think about it.
Yeah.
I was like, man, when I first heard about it, I was like, I don't know if I like that or not. I like all these. But
He's talking about the BLR-10B or
Yeah.
Revic
Yeah,
binoculars.
because they only hold one profile at a time,
Yeah.
right? And so you have to sync it really quick, send over a new one if you want a new one, right? You still have all the profiles in your app, right?
Mhm.
But you have to send a new one over all the time. And I thought, nah, that's just not. But then I started using it, and I started to realize how few errors that I was making, making sure I was on the right one. And,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're not, in the BR4, if you're not diligent and you're not backing out of the profile name every time, and maybe your temperature's showing in there and it's not showing which one you're on,
Sure.
you don't know which one it is.
Like your display is.
Yeah. So the binos, I would say, are pretty foolproof
Yeah.
when it comes to you send over and you're using whatever you've sent over. There's no way to get in there and your buddy pushes some buttons and all of a sudden now you're on the 308 instead of the 7 mag, right? Like
Yeah.
there's no way to make that happen in the unit itself. I've grown accustomed to that, and I do like that now, I would say,
And
over the multiple in the unit itself.
and I'd say too is what I like to do with the binos, just for that last little bit of that warm fuzzy feeling I get knowing that, okay, everything's correct. Is I'll send a profile over to it, and then I'll just laze something out there around 600 yards, and then on the same profile in the app, enter 600 yards and make sure that the data it's displaying is within about a tenth or so of, what the app says.
Sure.
Keep in mind it might be like a tenth off because, the binos using real-time atmospherics, whereas the app's, pulling off a weather station somewhere.
Yeah.
But
See,
Yeah, I would take that. You can actually make that just a little faster, Brian, and I'm sure you know about this, but if you leave the devices connected and go back to the ballistic calculator and then range the target, it will show you the drop in the unit, and then the range will auto-populate into the app, and then it will give you the correction there, so you won't actually have to go in and put it in. Just a little quicker. Exactly what you were doing, but
I've seen it, but I
a
hadn't thought of it.
little bit quicker.
Yeah,
if you just
it
go
is.
back to the ballistic
wizard.
profile.
The wizard.
Yeah.
See,
Just
this
range-
always happens. I
range the target.
find something I like,
Yeah.
and then Brian and Jeremy just shoot it down because they just have more knowledge and experience than me. It humbles me every time.
No, we're not.
I get real excited about
We're not shooting you down.
I know.
I'm just saying.
You're right. It takes out another error that could happen.
Well,
Here's the difference. Ian has friends. Ian has hunting buddies. We don't.
Yeah.
So that's
right.
the difference.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, here, I bruised your ego on the BR4 with the binos. So here, let me boost up the BR4 for you a little.
Oh,
So the most unused and forgotten about function in that whole unit is the trajectory validation.
Yes.
Nobody has that in their units. We're the only ones that have that, and it's so simple to use. You go into the trajectory validation tab, you range a target downrange, you dial that in, you shoot. Let's say you hit a minute low. You adjust in the unit the correction that it ranged and that shoot to, you adjust it up a minute, and you hit OK, and it asks you, do you want to change the velocity or the BC? Whichever. Let's say we change the velocity. It auto changes the velocity, updates in the unit itself the new profile, and now you have an adjusted working profile ready to roll in the unit without having to get out your app, without having to sync anything. In my opinion, that's the coolest thing ever about the BR4.
Yes.
And Aaron, I wish we had it in the binos.
Yeah.
It sets it apart from
Yeah.
just about everything, and
Yeah.
having the ability, but hardly anybody knows it's in there.
Oh yeah.
I use it all the time.
I'm always truing from something's not quite right, so I go back into my app.
Yep.
Because you built a profile and now you're checking stuff, and you built a profile, you send it over to the rangefinder, and you start shooting, and now you're like, well, crap, I got to change stuff, and then re-Bluetooth it over.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
no,
what's one of the big things we see with our students when we're doing that, right? We'll go back to the ballistic. We'll go back to the app, and they'll refresh their weather, or they'll change it to manual or something like that. And now the atmospherics that we're sitting at are different. The temperature's different. The altitude's different, right? And we don't see that, and then we true the trajectory to these untrue values, right? You eliminate that problem with the rangefinder, because when you press the fire button, it samples all that instantly. You don't have the opportunity to put bad things into the trajectory validation.
So because it's a more accurate way to.
In my opinion, it is, because you don't have to keep track of everything, all those inputs, right? Azimuth, all that stuff. You have to make sure it's right every time you go back in there, or else your data, you're going to true to incorrect data.
The funny thing is, I just had a student ask about that at our class in California. He asked, gosh, what was it? he was turning on his rangefinder to get the temperature, and then he would plug it in to his app.
Yep.
And then he was toggling to find the pressure.
Yep.
And toggling to find the angle, and then inputting all of that in to get a accurate true.
True.
When the truing function is right there in your.
And it would he pushed the button and it was sampled it all instantly.
Yep.
And gave you a true according to that instant data. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
very cool.
Yeah, it is.
and really the field application for that is, a lot of these guys that are shooting factory ammunition, whether it's from, Federal or Hornady or whatever, you're going to see a little bit of velocity swing from lot number to lot number. You get a couple different boxes of ammo. Is this just a real easy way, just confirm 0 to 100, shoot 700, shoot 800, and whatever that offset is, if you're not hitting right, make the adjustment, true it in laser rangefinder, and you've now basically trued your system to this new lot number of ammo that probably has a little different velocity than what you originally shot.
Then you're not messing with a chronograph all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're just basing it on real shooting data.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. I'm glad you brought that up.
There you go. BR4 for the win.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. I love BR4.
Well, anything last minute comments before we kind of wrap this thing up on a ballistic rangefinder, why you need one?
Well, I think one of the maybe not a ballistic rangefinder, but let's go back to the smart rangefinder. I think one thing that sets smart rangefinders apart are targeting modes. Having the ability to tell the unit to ignore something, right? Like, so, ours has, some targeting modes, near, far, long range, near, long range, far, right? So near, you put on near mode, it tells the unit to ignore every object that breaks the threshold. So any reflection that breaks the threshold coming back to the unit beyond the closest target. Okay, so you have an antelope out front, and behind it some sagebrush and a bunch of rolly hills. And the beam, you can't tell, it's far enough out that you can't tell if you're hitting the antelope or the hill behind it, right? Or whatever, the trees behind it or whatever. Yeah. You can tell the unit, well, ignore all that stuff. Just give me what's up front, right? And then far's the opposite of that. Far ignores everything up front and only gives you the farthest target. I like to use that one in animals on a hillside, right? And then maybe there's some trees and some brush in between. It ignores everything in between and gives you only the farthest reflective target.
Sure.
Right? And so I think, that's one of the things that really makes rangefinder smart. We're doing it. We've also obviously done it since day one. We were probably one of the original guys doing it. There are a couple others out there that are doing it, but I believe we've kind of tuned ours up to be better than most when it comes to the ability to manipulate the programming or what that rangefinder actually sees downrange. So I think that's a big plus on the smart side as opposed to the non-smart side. On the non-smart side, you get what you get. You fire, you get no range, right? For whatever reason.
Yeah.
Snow and fog or rain.
Yeah, rain, snow, and
fog. That's the big one for far. There's still a limit on what it can cut through. Eventually the rain's going to get hard enough or the snow's going to get thick enough that
get too much reflection back.
You get too much reflection back and it can't hit the animal. But that far mode will increase your chances of getting an accurate range in a rainy, foggy, or snowy condition.
Yeah. And I really like how you explained it, because what most people think, even when we're teaching that class and you say there's a near mode and a far mode, and they're like, well, I'm going to be shooting animals out to 800 yards. Should I have it in far mode? And it's no, we're not saying that. It's not,
it's not range dependent.
Yeah. I stood outside, and this is the example I give in classes. I stood outside when the BR4 first came out, and I put it on near mode, and I was lasing the hillside at 3,200 yards, whatever. Yeah. And I was like, well, I'm in near mode. Well, that's the nearest thing that beam was touching.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good point. I like how you explained it. Then I think hopefully that kind of clears that up too. So yeah. Well, gosh. Okay. I guess that's it, guys. If you're getting into long range shooting and you're a serious hunter, the smart ballistic rangefinder is going to help you out a ton. Again, not sounds salesy. It's just something that I truly believe in. I'm going to talk to Aaron about maybe I'll do my own review on it, because man, I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll catch you next time, guys. Thanks for tuning in.
If you like what you're hearing here, please take a second and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. We appreciate your feedback and suggestions for topics you'd like discussed or questions you want answered on the podcast. You can reach out on Facebook or Instagram or send us an email to podcast@gunworks.com. Also, be sure and check out our full offering of long-range gear at gunworks.com. Use promo code LRP for free shipping on any order.